Welcome to an exploration of Homer the poet, who gave us the Iliad and the Odyssey, two cornerstones of Western literature. We're delving into the world of ancient Greece, a realm of heroes and gods and larger-than-life adventures. You might know a bit about Homer, but get ready to uncover some intriguing twists and fascinating details.
What makes Homer so captivating is the mystery surrounding his life. It's remarkable how little we know for sure.
Right, was he a real person?
Or was Homer maybe a title given to a group of poets? Did he really write these epic poems in the 8th century BCE? Or were they part of a longer, evolving tradition?
It's like piecing together a really old puzzle.
It is.
And for centuries, there have been all these colorful stories about Homer,
Oh, yeah.
like that famous account that says he was a blind bard from Ionia.
Right, in modern-day Turkey.
Some even said he was the child of a river god and a nymph.
While these stories are entertaining, most scholars now see them as more legend than fact.
So they're fun, but not reliable.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And this lack of concrete information just adds to the mystery of Homer.
It makes him even more intriguing.
Exactly.
Okay, let's shift our focus to the actual works. The Iliad and the Odyssey are obviously the most famous poems attributed to Homer, but there were others too, right?
Oh, yeah. In ancient times, many other works were connected with his name.
Like what?
For example, the Homeric hymns. It's a collection of hymns to the Greek gods.
Oh, okay.
And then there's this lighthearted poem about a battle between frogs and mice, the Batrachomyomachia.
A battle between frogs and mice. That sounds interesting.
It is surprisingly engaging, full of these mock heroic battles and really witty wordplay.
So a bit of humor mixed in with the epic battle.
Exactly. But most scholars today don't really consider these extra works as genuinely Homeric.
So not actually written by him.
Probably not. They likely come from different authors and different traditions.
Okay, so the Iliad and the Odyssey, those are the core of what we call Homeric.
Yeah.
When did people actually start analyzing and debating these epics?
The examination of Homer's work goes all the way back to ancient Greece itself.
Wow, so even back then.
Yeah, even then, thinkers and writers were grappling with how the gods were portrayed in these poems, and they were debating their deeper philosophical meanings.
So those discussions have been happening for like millennia.
Thousands of years.
Wow. Were there any particularly interesting schools of thought or ways of understanding Homer throughout history?
Certainly, during the Hellenistic and Roman eras, allegorical interpretations of Homer were quite popular.
Allegorical meaning.
They believed these poems had hidden moral and philosophical teachings.
Okay.
This perspective was revived during the Renaissance. Humanists saw Homer as a source of wisdom.
So a timeless source of knowledge.
Right. But then, in the 18th century, a new wave of scholarship challenged some of those long-held assumptions.
Oh, really? How so?
A scholar named Richard Bentley proposed that while Homer might have been a real person, he was likely a simple prehistoric bard.
Okay.
And he suggested that Homer's original songs were vastly different from the elaborate epics we know now.
That's a bold claim. Did many people agree with him at the time?
It was controversial, but his ideas paved the way for what later became known as the analyst school of thought in the 19th century.
The analysts, okay, what did they believe?
They believed that the Iliad and Odyssey were actually compilations
Compilations of what?
of shorter independent songs woven together by editors much later. And they were really focused on identifying those original song fragments and trying to understand how they eventually came together to form these larger narratives.
Like a scholarly detective story.
It is fascinating, and this led to a century of intense debate with the Unitarians on the other side.
Who were the Unitarians?
They championed the idea of a single brilliant author who was responsible for the poem's consistency and artistry.
So one side said many authors, the other side said one author. Who was right?
Well, this debate raged on until the mid-20th century when a groundbreaking theory emerged, and it shifted the focus from authorship to the very nature of oral poetry.
This sounds interesting. What was this new theory?
It was the work of Milman Parry and Albert Lord. They studied folk bards in the Balkans.
Folk bards.
Yeah, these bards could improvise epic songs on the spot. Traditional phrases, formulas, and stock scenes.
So they had a kind of toolkit of storytelling elements.
Exactly. Parry and Lord proposed that the Homeric poems were originally composed in a similar way, passed down and reshaped through generations of these oral performances.
So the Iliad and the Odyssey were like living, breathing stories constantly evolving until someone finally wrote them down.
Precisely. This explains those repetitions we find in the poems, the stock epithets, even some inconsistencies.
You mean like how certain descriptions or phrases pop up throughout the epics?
Exactly, those seemingly repetitive elements are crucial to how oral poets work. They allow for improvisation and weaving these complex narratives right on the spot.
So it's not just repetition for the sake of it.
Right. Imagine them as musical motifs adding texture and familiarity to the whole composition.
This totally changes how I see the Iliad and Odyssey. I can practically hear the bard reciting these tales by firelight, captivating his audience with stories of heroes and gods.
It's a powerful image, isn't it?
It is. But it also raises a really important question. How much of what we read in these epics is actual history versus poetic creation? Did the Trojan War really happen?
That question has intrigued scholars for centuries. The discovery of the ancient city of Troy in the late 19th century by Heinrich Schliemann provided some historical grounding.
So we know Troy existed.
Yes. But there's still a lot of debate. Some believe that if the Trojan War happened, it was probably a much smaller conflict than the grand epic portrayed by Homer.
Okay, so maybe not as dramatic as the poems make it seem?
Possibly. The prevailing view among scholars today is that the society depicted in Homer's poems is a blend of elements from various eras.
A blend of different time periods.
Right. For example, you find heroes using Bronze Age weaponry but practicing Iron Age burial customs.
So that's not a completely accurate historical record.
Exactly. And that's because these epics weren't meant to be pure history.
What were they meant to be then?
They served a broader purpose, to explore those timeless themes of love, war, fate, the very essence of being human.
Which is why they still speak to readers today.
Precisely. The Iliad and Odyssey give us a glimpse into a world very different from our own.
True.
Yet the emotions, the desires, the struggles of the characters are remarkably relatable.
We see ourselves in them, even though they're from such a different time.
Exactly. It's a testament to Homer's storytelling genius. These characters feel so real, so human, despite their larger-than-life exploits and the fantastical world they inhabit.
So how did these oral poems transition from spoken word to written text? It must have been a big change.
It was. It's believed that the poems were finally written down sometime between the 8th and 6th centuries BCE.
Okay, and that marked a major shift.
Absolutely, and how they were transmitted and preserved.
Do we know exactly how this happened? Was there like one definitive moment, or was it more gradual?
There are various theories. Some scholars suggest the poems might have been dictated to a scribe.
Dictated like someone reciting the poems and someone else writing them down.
Yes. And this might have involved a process of revision and expansion, similar to what Perry and Lord observed with the Balkan bards.
So a collaborative effort between the storyteller and the scribe.
Exactly. It wasn't just about transcribing word for word. It probably involved a dynamic interaction between the bard's oral artistry and the scribe's efforts to capture the essence of the performance in written form.
It makes you wonder how much was lost or changed in that process.
Absolutely. It's impossible to know for certain how much the written versions differ from the original oral performances.
But writing them down definitely had a huge impact on how they evolved.
Oh, yes. And on how people have received them ever since.
It was a turning point, shifting these epics from a fluid dynamic tradition to a fixed authoritative text.
A text that could be studied, analyzed, and debated for centuries to come.
It's a reminder that the texts we read today aren't simply static objects. They're the products of a long and complex historical journey.
A journey that began with a bard's voice, weaving tales of heroes and gods, and transporting audiences to a world of wonder and adventure.
And speaking of that bard's voice, let's talk about Homer's distinctive style. It has influenced countless writers over the centuries.
Absolutely.
What are some of the key elements that make his language and storytelling so unique?
His language is elegant and formulaic. He uses epithets, frequently vivid similes, and traditional phrases known as Homeric formulae.
Formulae, okay.
And these elements give his poems a very distinct rhythm and cadence.
I'm particularly fond of the epithets, those descriptive phrases attached to character, like rosy-fingered dawn,
Swift-footed Achilles.
wine dark sea.
Exactly. And those epithets are more than just decoration.
Right, they're very evocative. They create these strong images.
They do, but they also serve a practical purpose in oral poetry. They allow the bard to quickly evoke a character or a scene without stopping for lengthy descriptions.
It's like shorthand for the imagination.
Precisely. And Homer's similes are equally striking.
How so?
He often compares human actions to the natural world, creating these beautiful and often unexpected connections.
I remember one simile from the Iliad that compares the Achaean army charging into battle to a swarm of wasps enraged by a disturbance to their nest.
Yeah, it's so vivid.
It perfectly captures the intensity and chaos of the scene.
And that's what he does so well. He doesn't just tell us what's happening, he shows us, pulls us right into the action.
It's like we're right there on the battlefield, witnessing the clash of swords and the dust and the fury.
Exactly. And then there are the Homeric formula, those traditional phrases we talked about.
Right. How do those work? Are they just repeated word for word, or is there some flexibility in how they're used?
There's a certain flexibility to them. The bard can adapt them slightly depending on the context, or the meter of the verse, or the specific emphasis he wants to make.
So it's like having a set of building blocks. You can arrange them in different ways to create different effects.
A very good analogy. It's this blend of fixed elements and creative improvisation that gives Homeric poetry its unique character, that mix of tradition and originality.
It's fascinating how these stylistic elements, which seem so simple on the surface, actually contribute to the complexity and artistry of the poems.
They really do. They're like threads woven together to create this rich and intricate tapestry.
And this tapestry woven from language, myth, and history has captivated readers for millennia.
And it continues to inspire writers, artists, and musicians even today.
Homer's legacy extends far beyond the ancient world. His characters, his themes, his stories, they've become part of our collective cultural consciousness.
They have. It's remarkable how his influence is still so strong.
It really is. We've covered a lot in our exploration of Homer so far. The mysteries of his life, the complexities of the Iliad and Odyssey, the fascinating evolution of oral poetry.
It's been a great discussion.
But before we move on to the next part of our conversation, I want to touch on a few more intriguing details about these epics. I'm particularly fascinated by how Homer portrays the gods. They're not always benevolent, or just are they?
No, that's one of the most interesting aspects of his worldview. The gods in his epics are complex beings. They often intervene in human affairs. But they're driven by their own desires and rivalries.
So they're not perfect, all-knowing beings.
Not at all. They're just as flawed and multifaceted as the humans they interact with.
Like in the Iliad, when Zeus allows the Trojans to gain an advantage in the war, even though it goes against what the other gods want.
Right, or in the Odyssey, where Poseidon keeps thwarting Odysseus's journey home out of a personal grudge.
These interventions often have devastating consequences for the mortals caught in the middle.
It's true. Homer's gods aren't always the moral examples we might expect. They're more like forces of nature. Unpredictable and often driven by emotions that are very human.
It's almost as if Homer is reminding us that even in the ancient world, people wrestled with big questions about fate and the role of the divine.
And about the often arbitrary and unfair nature of life.
The epics don't shy away from those tough questions.
They don't. They offer a window into a world where the gods are powerful but not necessarily good, and where human lives are often at the mercy of their whims.
It makes the stories even more compelling, knowing that even the greatest heroes can be undone by the unpredictable nature of the divine.
Absolutely. This tension between human agency and divine intervention is a driving force in both epics.
And it reminds us that the ancient Greeks, just like us, were searching for meaning and understanding in a world that often felt unpredictable and unjust.
And they found comfort and wisdom in the stories of their heroes, their struggles, their triumphs, their enduring humanity in the face of overwhelming odds.
And those stories, those characters, they continue to resonate with us today.
They do.
Which brings us back to Homer, the poet who gave voice to these timeless tales. His words, echoing across centuries, continue to inspire us, challenge us, remind us of the enduring power of storytelling.
His epics are truly a gift, a treasure trove of wisdom, beauty, and enduring relevance.
They invite us to reflect on our own lives, our relationships, our place in this grand tapestry of human experience.
Let's look at some of the more controversial aspects of Homer's work. One debate that has gone on for centuries is about the violence in his poems, especially in the Iliad.
It's true, the Iliad doesn't hold back on graphic descriptions of battle scenes. We hear about wounds, bloodshed, the brutal realities of war. How can we reconcile that level of violence with the idea that these epics were meant to be moral and educational texts?
It's a great question. Some scholars say the violence isn't just there for shock value. It has a purpose in the narrative.
Okay, what kind of purpose?
Well, it highlights the tragic consequences of conflict. It shows us the human cost of war.
So it's not about glorifying violence, but more about portraying it realistically so the audience understands the horrors.
Exactly. By showing the physical and emotional toll of war, Homer encourages us to think about the futility of conflict and the value of peace.
I could see that. Even the toughest warriors in the Iliad have moments where they express exhaustion and a longing to go home. It makes you realize that everyone involved is affected by war.
Right. And there are these moments of compassion even in the midst of battle, like when Priam, the king of Troy, begs Achilles to return his son Hector's body.
That scene is so powerful. Even with all the brutality, there's shared humanity and grief that goes beyond the fighting.
It emphasizes that even the fiercest enemies have a common humanity, and it underscores the idea that peace and reconciliation, however difficult, are worth fighting for.
Another aspect of Homer's work that people talk about is how he portrays women. Some say that female characters are often secondary, defined mainly by their relationships to men.
Well, it's true that in ancient Greece, women's roles were often limited because it was a patriarchal society. But when we look closely at Homer's epics, we see female characters with strength, intelligence, and agency.
Like Penelope, Odysseus' wife.
Exactly.
She's smart, resourceful, unwaveringly loyal. She holds off those suitors and keeps hoping for Odysseus' return for 20 years.
Penelope is a great example of a woman in Homer who defies expectations. She's not just sitting around waiting for her husband to rescue her. She's actively shaping her own destiny, protecting her home and her husband's kingdom, using her intelligence and wit.
And then there's Helen. Her abduction started the whole Trojan War.
Right.
But even though her actions are often judged, Homer presents her with complexity.
He does.
We see her beauty, her intelligence, the struggle she faces as a pawn in this huge power struggle.
Helen's character shows that even in ancient literature, women weren't easily categorized as simply good or bad. They were individuals with their own motivations, desires, and flaws.
And their stories, even within the restrictions of their society, often challenge those limitations and show their inner strength.
Homer's epics offer a nuanced view of women's roles and experiences for their time.
It reminds us that even in ancient literature, we can find characters and stories that connect with us today, and they give us insight into the complexities of human relationships and societal norms.
It's a testament to Homer's skill as a storyteller. He created such compelling and enduring female characters within the constraints of his era.
Speaking of the context of Homer's epics, what can these poems tell us about the world they came from?
They give us a glimpse into ancient Greek society, their values, beliefs, customs. We get a sense of their political systems, their religious practices, social hierarchies, even their attitudes towards things like war hospitality and the importance of family.
The idea of Xenia hospitality to strangers is so important in both epics. It seems like it was fundamental to their culture.
It was absolutely fundamental. Xenia was a sacred duty. Mistreating a guest was a serious offense against the gods. This idea shows up throughout the Iliad and the Odyssey, even during war and personal conflicts.
It makes me think of the scene in the Odyssey where Odysseus is disguised as a beggar and he's welcomed into his own home by Eumaeus, his loyal swineherd. Eumaeus treats him with kindness and respect, even though Odysseus looks like he has nothing.
A perfect illustration of the importance of Xenia. Even when social status or personal circumstances might suggest otherwise, it's about recognizing the worth of every person and offering shelter, food, companionship without judgment.
It shows that even in ancient societies, there were values that went beyond personal gain or social status.
And these values are often reflected in the epic heroes themselves. Despite their amazing feats, they're expected to be humble, respectful, and aware of their responsibilities to their families, their communities, the gods.
So true heroism wasn't just about physical strength or winning battles.
No, it was about embodying these core values and living a life that deserves honor and respect.
And those values, as we see them in Homer's epics, have influenced Western culture and literature for centuries,
They have.
shaping our own ideas about leadership morality and the importance of compassion and hospitality.
It's amazing how these ancient stories, even though they're so far removed from our time and culture, can still resonate so strongly. That's the power of great literature. It goes beyond boundaries of time and culture. It offers timeless truths and insights into what it means to be human.
I'm curious about your perspective on this. We've talked about the historical and cultural context of Homer's epics, but what about their literary significance? How have they influenced later writers and artists?
Homer's influence on Western literature is huge. His epics have been a model for so many writers, from the ancient Greek tragedians like Aeschylus and Sophocles to Roman poets like Virgil and Ovid, all the way to modern novelists and playwrights.
Can you give some specific examples of how later writers have drawn from Homer's work?
Sure. Virgil's Aeneid, for instance, is often seen as a direct response to the Iliad and Odyssey. It tells the story of Aeneas, a Trojan hero, who escapes the fall of Troy and eventually founds Rome.
Okay.
It echoes many themes and motifs from Homer, like the journey home, the founding of a nation, the relationship between humans and the gods.
So Virgil took those elements from Homer and reinterpreted them through the lens of Roman history and mythology, creating a new epic that celebrated his own culture.
Exactly. And this idea of reimagining and reinterpreting Homeric stories and characters has continued through the ages. We see it in James Joyce's Ulysses, which draws parallels between the wanderings of Leopold Bloom in Dublin and Odysseus's epic journey.
It shows how deeply rooted Homer's epics are in our literary tradition, that writers can draw on them in such creative and insightful ways.
We see this influence in so many works. Dante's Inferno features Homer as one of the great poets of antiquity. Tennyson's poem Ulysses explores themes of aging and adventure. Margaret Atwood's The Penelopiad retells the Trojan War from Penelope's point of view.
It's remarkable how Homer's characters and themes have spoken to writers across cultures throughout history.
It shows that his epics, even though they're ancient, still have something to teach us about ourselves and the world. They offer timeless reflections on love loss, war peace, and that search for meaning in a world that can feel chaotic.
So while we may never know exactly who Homer was or the exact details surrounding his epics, his impact is undeniable.
Absolutely. His work continues to inspire, challenge, and captivate, encouraging us to go on our own journeys of discovery and self-reflection.
In a world with so much information and fleeting trends, there's something really comforting and inspiring about revisiting these ancient tales that have stood the test of time. One of the most striking examples is how his characters have become these archetypes,
Oh, yeah.
representing universal human qualities and experiences, like Odysseus,
The classic
the
hero.
cunning hero who overcomes all these obstacles to get back home. His name has become synonymous with resourcefulness
Resilience.
and that unyielding human spirit.
Absolutely. And then there's Achilles.
Right.
His name makes you think of both incredible strength and deep vulnerability.
Yeah. A reminder that even the greatest heroes can be ruled by rage and pride.
And the pain of loss.
These figures have really transcended their original context.
They have.
They become touchstones for exploring the complexities of human nature and the timeless struggles we all face.
Their stories resonate because they tap into something fundamental about what it means to be human
Something universal.
that goes beyond time and culture.
It's like Homer found this source of universal storytelling, drawing on those primal narratives that have captivated people for centuries.
His masterful use of language, too, those vivid similes, the evocative epithets,
The rhythmic formulae.
all of those have become interwoven with our literary heritage.
Even those who haven't actually read the Iliad or the Odyssey, they still recognize phrases like rosy-fingered dawn or wine-dark sea,
They've seeped into our language.
enriching it and shaping how we imagine things.
It's amazing how his words have lasted for so long.
They really have.
They're still capable of stirring such powerful images and emotions.
Here's something I've been thinking about. How do we reconcile the huge influence of these epics with the fact that they came from a specific time and culture? One that seems pretty brutal and patriarchal by today's standards.
We have to approach them with a critical eye. Recognize the historical context that shaped them.
Right. Understand that some of the values and viewpoints might not align with ours.
It's not about just blindly accepting everything we read. It's about engaging, thoughtfully appreciating the artistry while questioning the assumptions and challenging the limitations.
We can admire the beauty and complexity of Homer's epics, while recognizing that they also reflect the norms of ancient Greece. So although Homer's world might seem distant in some ways, his stories offer lasting lessons that still resonate.
His legacy lies not only in the specific stories he told, but in how he shaped storytelling itself.
Writers, artists, musicians, they've all found inspiration in his epics.
Reimagining his characters, exploring his themes, continuing that conversation that started centuries ago.
That conversation goes beyond just art and literature, though.
It does.
Homer's epics have also influenced how we understand history mythology.
And even the nature of human consciousness.
It's fascinating how these poems blend historical events with mythical elements. They've sparked debates about whether the Trojan War really happened and how accurate Homer's portrayal of ancient Greek society was. It reminds us that history is often a matter of interpretation.
It's a blend of fact and fiction.
And Homer's epics have played a big role in how we understand that blend, blurring the lines between myth and reality. Homer's epics show the timeless power of storytelling.
A power that's just as relevant now as it was centuries ago.
Especially in a time of digital distractions and fleeting trends, It's more important than ever to revisit those timeless tales. Let's take those lessons with us. The importance of critical thinking,
The enduring power of storytelling.
the timelessness of those universal themes that connect us all,
Keep discovering meaning and beauty in those stories that have stood the test of time.
the ones that remind us who we are, where we came from, and the limitless possibilities that lie ahead.
Thanks for joining us on this journey into the world of Homer.
We hope you enjoyed it, and we encourage you to keep exploring those epics and find your own interpretations of those timeless tales.